What a happy day. How nice is this? The Memphis Grizzlies get recognized in a positive way. Yay! We don't get this very often. It's been very negative around these parts recently. People pointing at the Grizzlies saying, you're no good. Dillon Brooks stinks. Why does he talk so much? He needs to shut up. Well, today, Dillon Brooks, you have your day, sir, because you are a member of the All-NBA defensive team. Jaren Jackson Jr. is on there as well. We're going to talk about that and more on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is a wonderful Wednesday here on Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you so much for joining us wherever you may be listening, however you get your podcasts. If you're checking us out on YouTube, it is much appreciated. I am Joe Mullinax, one of your hosts, joined by my co-host, Damichael. This is Locked On Grizzlies. Again, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can also check us out on YouTube. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, all those fun things. It's all good when you're checking out Locked On Grizzlies. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. I am joined, as I mentioned, by Damichael, the commercial appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. I am the interim Grizzlies content editor. I feel like I'm going to say the title wrong every time I do it. I'm running the Grizzlies stuff for Bluff City Media now because Parker Fleming stepped down. That's basically the end of that. It's an interim title. Hopefully somebody gets that gig from me so I can, go back to my Grizzlies columnist job. But anyway, between Damichael and I, lots of time covering these Grizzlies. You've come to the right place if you're looking for Memphis Grizzlies content. And, Damichael, you look nice today. I can't tell. Is that a white hoodie or a gray hoodie?
It's a light gray. So it's
light gray. So we're not quite the white shirt.
Not quite
buddies,
white. Yeah.
We're not the white shirt.
We're not the white shirt buddies today.
Okay, that's all right. We're close. We're the light colored friends.
There we go.
Light colored shirt friends. I think that Damichael, we should all be wearing Dillon Brooks jerseys today because Dillon Brooks is getting a little bit of redemption, but we'll talk about Dillon later on in the show, maybe preview what's to come for Ja Morant today on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. But we're going to lead off with the guy who was the home run pick in terms of you win Defensive Player of the Year, chances are you're going to be first team all defense. I know you talked about your votes for the awards this past Monday on our Monday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Yep. So I think both of us can agree that we're not really surprised that Jaren was selected first team all defense.
Right.
I thought maybe we could focus on the historic aspect. He's the first one since Tony Allen, I believe, to have multiple first team all defensive selections. Of course, everybody knows TA's legacy. If you pay attention to the Memphis Grizzlies the last decade, you know the legacy of Tony Allen defensively in Memphis. But beyond that, the reality of this guy being 23 years old, being this good on this end of the floor, the historic perspective of what Jaren Jackson Jr., because most folks would agree, your prime is around 26, 27 years old, right?
Statistically speaking, yeah.
Right. He's 3 years away from that. He'll turn 24 soon, I know. He's a few years away from that happening. What is, a great piece was written over at Bluff City Media by one of our writers, Andrew Katz, I believe it was. The ceiling is unknown for Jaren Jackson Jr. Do you agree with that sentiment? Is this just a more of a reinforcement of the fact that we have no idea how good Jaren Jackson Jr. can be?
Yeah, we don't at this point. And, I think I have an idea. We talk about it with seven free throw attempts per game, 23, 24 points per game. That's an idea. If he gets there, it's completely up to him. I'm thinking about a guy like Dillon Brooks, who's constantly been in his ears over the years, demanding dominance from him.
Right.
It sounds like Dillon. We won't hover on that too much on this episode. This is a celebration of Dillon episode, but
yeah, we're celebrating here.
Sounds like he won't be able to be that guy going forward. And we've talked about some guys who can be that, Desmond Bain, John Morant, etc. But Jaren's going to have to be that guy for himself. And I think he's starting to realize how dominant he can be, and we're going to see more of that as well. So I agree with you on kind of that swing of things, but not to really switch the tone here. But I was thinking about this too, Joe. Jaren was historically dominant. Missed the first 14 games of the season,
right,
and came back. The Grizzlies were 17th in defensive efficiency when he returned. They finished second in the NBA in defensive efficiency after the return of Jaren Jackson Jr. Quite frankly, he was dominant last season when he was first team all defense and finished, I think, 5th in the defensive player of the year voting. This year stepped it up a notch. By the way, I think looking at the voting, he got 96. So I think he missed out on 2 of the ballots. I think a couple had him second.
Almost a unanimous selection.
Yeah, almost a unanimous selection, but the highest. But here's my point. He played 63 games this season. Do you know that if this was next season, he wouldn't even have qualified for this award? Look how dominant, look how much he meant to the Grizzlies. We've already talked about the fact that we're going to really dive into the new CBA, and we're going to do a whole episode kind of centered around that. But I couldn't help but think about that because this puts in perspective how off those changes could be, because the Grizzlies, as I just said, 17th in defensive efficiency before this guy played a game this season. Finished the season second. And not only that, he missed the first 14 games. After that, he missed a couple back-to-backs, missed the game at the end of the season. He was pretty much healthy. He finished the season playing, I think, 64 of the last 68 games, something like that. So, quite frankly, anyways, 63 of the last 60, I think it was. But dominant season from Jaren Jackson Jr., incredible defender. It was a joy to watch him guard on the ball, guard off the ball, get blocks in so many different directions. I joke a lot about how you look at guys' spray charts with the blocks. If you look at Brook Lopez, all the blocks come in like pretty much in the same area, pretty much. If you look at Rudy Gobert, for the most part, a lot of his blocks come in the same area. But if you look at Jaren's, his spray chart is a little bit wider, in his career, because we see him get out on the perimeter. We see him be in all these different positions to get his blocks. And I think that's a testament to how multiple he is and the variety of ways you can use him. We talk about Brook Lopez being pretty much a drop coverage guy and that type of defender, but Jaren, you can play him in any type of way. But I had to slide that into the episode. 63 games played this season. 65 is going to be the new standard. And I'm not really feeling that whole rule change now that I see it come into play with the defensive player of the year and the first team all defense member, because we're not even talking about this if it's next season.
Yeah. And if a hot dog was a hamburger, it would be a circle instead of a tube. All right. I think that I think it was Bobby Marks tweeted that out as well. The idea of Jaren wouldn't have been eligible for selection because he only played 63 games. You can't apply, and I know you're not, I'm just saying in general, that's next season, right? And I do think, and again, we have a long off season ahead of us. I think we can spend an episode, a way that the team can change their perspective would be to play these guys more, right? They play so little, and then, there's questions about Jaren's foul trouble, when in reality, they just legitimately only played him 30 minutes a game. It was like that was their focus.
That was the team,
So, again, the medical team, maybe that's a little bit different, but we can talk more about that. For me, the big thing coming out of this before we head into break is, not necessarily destiny, because he still has a long ways to go, but potential fulfilled, right? Because even back in 2018, when I was there at FedEx Forum and the pick was booed, because it was booed.
I remember.
Jaren was not universally beloved at that time. Even from people like me who were not super excited about the pick, I knew that Jaren had the potential to be elite defensively. That was never the question, right? That was one of the things they sold Jaren on, a continuation of grit and grind. Because if you remember, his buddy in that draft class was Javon Carter, right? So it was supposed to be a return of grit and grind with Jaren and Javon Carter. Obviously, one half of that worked out pretty well. Javon Carter had a pretty good year this past year. Might get a little money in free agency, but I digress. Jaren's defensive acumen was always something that was hyped up. That was the main thing early on to be excited about with him as such a young prospect. 2-time first team, all defensive team, reigning defensive player of the year. I think it's safe to say his potential has been reached. But again, one of the amazing things is, can he get better? He's 23 years old. It's hard to say that he's peaked. So what the next level is for him, I'm sure we can talk about on a future episode of Locked On Grizzlies. But coming up next on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, if you thought I've been insufferable before, guess what? I am going to give Dillon Brooks all the flowers, and it's going to be beautiful because you know what? He deserves it. Sorry, Jaden McDaniels, you don't play guard. Dillon Brooks does. We're going to talk about that and more next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is wonderful because they are there for you when you're in a rush trying to buy tickets. It won't lead to you feeling stressed out. You can find them really easily using the Game Time app, buying tickets for all sports, music, all sorts of different events with amazing deals on last-minute tickets and the best price guarantee. You can use the Game Time app to find images of seat views so you know exactly what you're getting yourself into at a venue, flash deals on last-minute tickets, and again, the lowest price guarantee. They will, at Game Time, give you 110% credit of the difference if you find tickets in the same section and row of an event for less than the Game Time guaranteed price. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. We're talking Dillon Brooks, second team all NBA defense next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host, Joe Mullinax of Bluff City Media. That's probably the easiest way to do this moving forward. Just say I'm of Bluff City Media. I also write for SB Nation. You can check out my work and everything that I do at Joe Mullinax. The Twitter feed is a great way to find it. Damichael, my wonderful co-host of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. He is the Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. Follow him at Damichael C if you don't already do so. He will continue the great work that he does all season long. And like I've started to say recently, between he and I and Locked On Grizzlies, we got you covered as your first listen each and every day here on Locked On Grizzlies. Damichael, we knew Jaren was going to be first team. Mm-hmm. Dillon, I was fairly confident on, and I think you had talked about you were kind of confident as well in your own voting experience. But that was certainly less of a guarantee, right? And one of the interesting things about Dillon is we talked about the CBA earlier. There's going to be a move away from positions for the all defensive team next year. And that will be interesting in and of itself. But this year there were positions. And this year Dillon Brooks was qualified as a guard. And I think it's probably safe to say that's the reason why Dillon Brooks, even though he is a very good perimeter defender and people are letting what happened with the Lakers series cloud their judgment, we're talking regular season awards. And if you watch the Memphis Grizzlies over the course of the regular season and you weren't impressed with Dillon Brooks as a defender, you weren't watching the games.
Yeah, he deserved it. I mean, this was his best defensive season as an NBA player, and
which is good because it was his worst offensive season.
Yeah, it had to be his best defensive season.
Cancels it out.
Yeah, but I mean, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, I remember it was November, came into that game against the Grizzlies, probably 30 points or more, 6 or so games in a row, held him to like 19 points, and he just was all over him. Zion Williamson, we talked about it time and time again, was probably one of the most unstoppable players in the NBA over those first 2.5 months of the season. Dillon Brooks gave him 2 of his worst games of the season. One of them, he had his highest turnovers, and the other one, he just wasn't effective. I mean, he missed a lot of shots. He was out in both for Grizzlies wins. Lauri Markkanen, he also matched up against. After Lauri Markkanen had given Santi Aldama some trouble early in the season, when Jaren Jackson Jr. was out, and they got Jaren back, and he matched up against Lauri Markkanen. Now, we know about all the guards he matches up against.
Right.
But I wanted to highlight some of those other, matchups just to show his versatility stood out, his physicality, his ability to bang, with Pascal Siakam, who was the reigning Eastern Conference Player of the Week when Dillon Brooks held him to, I think, around 24, 25 points, which was, a big
low
deal
for him at that time.
Yeah, at that time, he was probably the hottest player in the NBA. So, he deserved this without a doubt. And we talked about Jaren's greatness, right? What Jaren has talked a lot about is how the way Dillon plays has kind of allowed him to be great in some of those ways. And I said this, and I wrote this earlier as well in my story. It's not to say that, without Dillon, Jaren wouldn't be a great defender, because guess what? He was first team all defense last season, and
Right.
Dillon missed, more than a third of the season. But the point is, having Dillon on the floor, maybe if Dillon isn't playing, Jaren is guarding Zion more, and there could be some foul trouble and things that pop up of that nature. If Jaren has to guard Lauri Markkanen, now you're bringing him away from the basket much more, and in situations like that. But having Dillon Brooks allows you to, okay, if you're playing the Lakers and LeBron James next season, maybe that's more of a matchup that's going to be for Jaren Jackson Jr., while that other guard has to guard Jared Vanderbilt or something like that. Basically, Dillon Brooks kind of allowed the Grizzlies to kind of do some of those things to put Jaren Jackson Jr. in place to be the best defensive player. The defensive player of the year, from this past season. So I wanted to give him his flowers on that end too. But here's another thing that I've thought about as well, Joe. Now that he has this on his resume, you remember when Draymond Green was throwing shots at him, and he basically was saying, he has nothing on his resume, right? Now you look at Dillon Brooks' resume, there's a all defensive team on there, and it's right before he hits free agency. That holds weight, not only as an agent, but front offices will see that. And even if he isn't coming back to Memphis, there is an opportunity. There's more of an opportunity now where the Grizzlies could potentially kind of reignite the flame there, getting a possible sign and trade done where teams will really value getting Dillon Brooks as a piece. Remember, it was only a week ago when Shams Charania's report came out, and we saw the words, under any circumstances, Dillon Brooks wouldn't return. And it made it look like, oh man, if the Grizzlies think it's that bad, we don't want to do anything with them. But I tell you what, other front offices, other agents, all these people are going to take note. This guy was voted as one of the top 4 defensive guards in the NBA. The Grizzlies have an opportunity to potentially get something done, Joe.
I would say that it matters more in terms of smoke screen, and I'll explain what I mean by that.
I get that.
The front office of these NBA teams, everybody is paid very well to know exactly who Dillon Brooks is, right? Dillon Brooks runs his mouth too much. Dillon Brooks does things terribly on the offensive end, at least this past season he did. There are flaws to Dillon Brooks, but to NBA front office, scouts, coaches, Dillon Brooks being one of the best defensive players in the NBA is not surprising.
Yeah.
But as you know, Damichael, and I know a little bit as well, perception is reality. And right now, the reality of Dillon Brooks is he sucks, because that's what the perception of him is. So if you, as a fan of the Portland Trailblazers, maybe actually that's not because of the Oregon connection, that wouldn't be a good comp. Say you're a fan of the Miami Heat. That might be a good way to go. Mm-hmm. Say you're a fan of the Miami Heat, and Memphis negotiates a sign and trade. I haven't worked one out with the Miami Heat, so I don't know what would fit.
Yeah, we're just
maybe
talking.
Duncan Robinson or someone like that, something like that. Again, I'm not saying I would do that. I'm giving you a hypothetical. Say that occurs, and now Dillon Brooks is a member of the Miami Heat, and fans are, oh my God, this guy sucks. Isn't this the dude that talked all that trash to LeBron and called him old? The front office can have a press conference and say, here is an all NBA defensive team player. Here's a guy who can pick up, and next to Jimmy Butler is going to be a monster on that end of the floor. You got Bam Adebayo on the back end. We just created the league's best defensive team by acquiring Dillon Brooks. And here's the evidence, the resume that backs it up. So I think that impact makes a sign and trade more likely, because Miami's not going to be able to sign him with cap space, right? A team like Houston could, Detroit, Indiana might have some cap space. There's teams that are going to be able to say, oh yeah, we just want Dillon Brooks and we'll sign him for X amount of dollars. The net gets wider when a sign and trade is possible, because now you can send him to Toronto. Now you can send him to Portland. Now you can send him to Miami and other different spots. And again, it becomes more palatable for a front office to sell a fan base on an acquisition that is going to be controversial when it happens. No matter what team he goes to, it is going to be wait a second, isn't that the guy from the Grizzlies-Lakers series that poked the bear? That's going to be the story that follows Dillon until it doesn't. And for that perception to change, he has to go and improve as an offensive player and continue to build upon his defensive ability. The good news is for Dillon, as long as he stays healthy, he's going to be a great defender, because so much of what makes Dillon great, his physicality, his frame, his tenacity, the way he mentally prepares, that travels, man. And that's something that, as he gets older, he might lose half a step or a step. That's not going to matter as much, except for maybe you move him to a small ball four kind of situation a little bit more consistently, because he's still going to have all those things that made him great in the first place. So kudos to you, Dillon Brooks. I know you've got some flack over the last few weeks. Enjoy this moment. You deserve it. Well-deserved national recognition for the defensive acumen and season of Dillon Brooks. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to preview the All-NBA announcement later today. I know Damichael did a great job talking about his voting, his logic, where Ja Morant stacks among the other guards in the NBA. I didn't get a chance to give my perspective. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and we'll take a look at a preview of what I think is going to be a disappointing Wednesday in the Ja Morant household. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies, finishing up this Wednesday edition of the podcast. I am Joe Mullinax of Bluff City Media and SB Nation, one of your hosts, joined by my wonderful co-host, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, covering the Memphis Grizzlies for that publication. We appreciate all of you that are joining us on this episode each and every day, and every dayer, hopefully, is what I can call you of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Damichael, I know that you had a pretty strong Monday show. I listened to it. It was great. But if you could just refresh my memory, a brief summary, because, again, we talked about Jaren, we talked about Dillon. Woohoo, they're on the team. The All-NBA guard list is pretty stacked, and that was even before Ja Morant had his suspension.
So stacked that think about names like Jalen Brunson, Kyrie Irving, James Harden, and what he's doing in the playoffs with the Sixers right now. These are guys who are pretty much long shots to make All-NBA this season. Jalen Brunson, what he's done in New York. Kyrie, amid all the off-the-court things, he was terrific and efficient this season with the Nets for the most part, but he kind of held his own as well with the Mavs. And then James Harden. I mean, the assist leader this season and a terrific scorer in his own right. And each of those guys didn't sniff my ballot. And they're long shots overall. But you made a great point when you kind of teased it yesterday when you're talking about the guards in the situation. That's kind of what I touched on Monday a little bit, basically saying if you look at it, there's 6 guard spots. And here's the tricky one as well. I had a ballot, so I can pretty much name some of the players who were listed at guards who you would probably consider forwards. Some people, because you got names like LeBron James, Jimmy Butler, who are kind of on the brink of being potential second team, third team forwards. Some people will say, hey, Jaylen Brown, he wouldn't be higher on the forwards list than those guys, and Jaylen Brown could potentially steal a guard spot. And I mean, it's tough. So basically what I brought it down to, Joe, and it'll be interesting to hear how would you come to a decision on this? Right. Because for me, circumstance is matters, but it's not I consider circumstance more than result. For example, Damian Lillard, the team around him wasn't built to win. This was still his most efficient season. We saw it firsthand. Dillon Brooks was talking about guys giving him 40. Damian Lillard did it. So Damian Lillard was on mine. Second team, by the way. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Yes, Oklahoma City wasn't supposed to, win games this season and all that. But I mean, he led that team to a play-in, and quite frankly, he was just hard to stop for anybody.
Mm-hmm.
They were terrific at home against some of the best teams in the NBA. So I factored all of that in, as well as his terrific, defensive side, being terrific on defense as well. What about Luka? Yes, the Mavs fell off second half of the season, but again, circumstance. If you go back to the first half of the season, the Mavs are in the playoffs. If they don't make that trade, and you still have Dorian Finney-Smith, Spencer Dinwiddie, and Luka's got the ball more in his hands, and it's not this whole getting readjusted to playing with Kyrie thing. The Mavs are more than likely in the playoffs at that point. And Luka was terrific up to that point of the season, and he was good enough the rest of the season to still be considered All-NBA, in my opinion. So with all those guys on my list, I think a lot of people respect what De'Aaron Fox did. That's 5. That's 5 guards for me. Because, again, some people say, oh, Damian Lillard didn't win enough this year. That's bullcrap to me. That's bullcrap to me because he can't control that Shaedon Sharpe is starting games beside him. He can't control that. He can't control Anthony Simons getting hurt. But what he can control is getting out there and getting buckets. So with all that being said, some tough decisions were made. I had Ja third team. Joe, it doesn't sound like you think he's got a chance this year.
No, I don't have Ja third team. This is what my team would look like. Okay. And I'll start from the bottom where Ja would be most likely to be. Because again, even if Ja was able to play those 8 games and prove his numbers, he's a third team guard, given a lot of the reasons that you just outlined.
Yeah.
My third team is Damian Lillard, who had an amazing season, and I agree, 32 points a game on average. A guy that's known for being an amazing scorer, has his best season ever. It's kind of hard to not have him on the team. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you might have left Donovan Mitchell.
It was tough.
Donovan Mitchell is a guy
that
I would have third team.
And I get
because, again, a career season for a really good Cleveland team that led the NBA in all the different categories in terms of efficiency and that sort of thing. The analytics loved Cleveland. Obviously, it didn't result in a playoff win. But I think Donovan Mitchell deserves recognition. He'd be third team for me. Second team would be De'Aaron Fox, the clutch player of the year and all the amazing things that he did. But you could easily make an argument for Lillard or Mitchell, in my opinion, in front of Fox for the fourth spot as a guard. To me, the top 3 are very obvious. It's Luka Doncic, Steph Curry, and SGA, Gilgeous-Alexander there in Oklahoma City. Those are the 3 best guards in the NBA this past season. And that's not even including Devin Booker,
who someone's going to throw him on there.
Season. Yeah. Right. There's going to be people that vote for him. Again, it's a regular season award. It doesn't take into account the brilliance that he's having in the postseason. But you bring up Jaylen Brown and Jimmy Butler, 2 guys who should be in that second or third team mix at forward, because Jason Tatum and Giannis will almost certainly be the 2 forwards on the first team. LeBron's in that conversation. Lauri Markkanen probably needs to be in the forward conversation. So until you go positionless, I don't know if we're looking at guards. I am perfectly fine with saying that Lillard, Fox, Mitchell, Doncic, Curry, and SGA are your 6, because Ja missed out on opportunity to improve his numbers, to build his stats. And we talked about with Dillon Brooks, whether it's fair or unfair. Perception is reality. And right now, Ja Morant, even though the Ja Morant, again, in the public eye, I don't think Ja's hurting as much as others think he is. The Ja ones are still flying off the shelves, folks.
Yeah.
There ain't people saying, oh, you know what? I remember the terrible article about him. I'm not going to purchase these shoes for my child. No, you can't get them. They go live and then it's poof, they're gone, right? So I think that's being overblown, perhaps not surprisingly. But in terms of the ability to produce, to put up numbers, there are too many guys that logically, even if Ja had played, I think Morant makes it if he doesn't get suspended. But if somebody were to say, I'm putting Mitchell or I'm putting Lillard or I'm putting Fox in front of Ja, it's not insane. It's just not, because that's how loaded the guard position is in the NBA right now. So if he hadn't gotten suspended, does he probably get in based off of his name and the fact he was there last year and the fact that he did have a really good season? Yeah, I think he does. the opening is now there for someone like a Mitchell, a Fox, a Lillard to get that recognition, and Ja kind of falls backwards, and it's a $40 million blunder essentially as he misses out on the Supermax clause kicking in his extension.
Yeah, and I'll add this because when I was making my ballot, it was tough because there were points where I wanted to leave. I turned mine in on the last possible day because I wanted to see as much of Ja, Donovan Mitchell, De'Aaron Fox, just the guards. I mean, it was really tough. And what it came down to me is, again, circumstance that guys control is all that I have to factor in. I think too many times we say, oh, this guy, like with Jaren, for example, not us, we don't, but other people. Right. Oh, Jaren's only playing 28 minutes per game. Well, the coaches, the actual whole team, plays their starters as a whole play less than other starters. And which brings me back to my point with Ja. I was looking at Ja and Donovan Mitchell really close. Donovan Mitchell played 4 more minutes per game than Ja. I think it was around 31.9 for Ja.
Yeah.
And it was like 35.8 for Donovan Mitchell. I think Donovan Mitchell averaged around 28 points. Ja was at about 26. So it was like a 2-point gap with a 4-minute gap as well. So just looking at those little small things, Ja did take a step up as a passer this season. He was much more, effective in that part of the game. I think had a career playmaking season. But here was the one thing that stood out to me. We spent a lot of time last season saying, "Oh, the Grizzlies were 16-2 at one point without Ja, 17-2."
Mm-hmm.
Well, guess what? This season, 41-20 when Ja played, 11-10 in the regular season when he did.
Isn't that interesting? I think that's a wonderful note to end on. Again, when you're judging the Grizzlies with other players, you have to take into account per 36, per 100 possession. They just don't play as many minutes as these other guys do. And until that changes, and maybe it never changes, but until that changes, you can't compare them the same. And like you said, you don't want to punish them for something that they don't have any control over.
Yeah,
I do think, and obviously the waters get muddy here, Morant did have control over what led to him missing that stretch of games. So again, he opens up the possibility of saying, I'm going to put, if it's close between Donovan Mitchell and Ja Morant, one guy had a very tumultuous season that was self-admittedly, a distraction to his team. And the other guy was, the catalyst for making the Cleveland Cavaliers a title contender in the eyes of many throughout the season. So I think that is important to point out. And this is Locked On Grizzlies. Don't get me wrong. If Ja Morant's
but it's fair.
third team All-NBA, great. That'd be fantastic. But we got to be unbiased where we can be. And I think this is just going to be a situation where there's a lot of good guards in the NBA. One of those really good guards made some poor choices and allowed for openings for other really good guards to take advantage of, at least when it comes to this particular measure of NBA success. There's plenty of others. And I know Ja Morant, to his credit, has said the one that he cares about moving forward is an NBA championship. And that pursuit carries on even as the offseason grinds forth for the Memphis Grizzlies. Thank you so much for making us a part of your Wednesday, however you're taking in the podcast, wherever you're listening. If you're watching on YouTube, like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. And shout out to the everydayers, those of you that are with us each and every day here on Locked On Grizzlies. Damichael appreciates it. I know I appreciate it. It's all well and good. And our Thursday episode, Damichael, basically writes itself, much like today's show did. All NBA selections. Did Ja Morant make it? Did he not make it? What does he need to do next year to make it? There's all sorts of different angles that we can take. Does Jaren Jackson Jr., does he kind of find a way to make a leap into all NBA candidacy? Because the third, and I know positionless stuff is coming, but the third team center is probably going to be Domantas Sabonis, who deserves it. Don't get me wrong. But if you count Jaren as a center, Anthony Davis, of course, will be in that mix. And we saw Anthony Davis's greatness in the Lakers series. Jaren may not be that far behind in terms of all NBA selection if he's able to continue to make leaps. So I look forward to our all NBA edition of the show on Thursday.
Yeah, me too, partner. Me too. It's It's going to be interesting to see. I just want to see the votes. I think with the defensive votes, if any of you saw them, it was pretty easy.
Yeah,
for the most part. I know Giannis and Jaden McDaniels were left off, and they were pretty good candidates. But outside of that, the guys who got votes got a lot of votes. I mean, first team was almost. I mean, it was without a doubt for the most part with the first team all defense. I mean, all the way from Drew Holiday, Caruso, Evan Mobley, Jaren, and Brooke Lopez. I mean, I didn't have to think hard on it. It seems like that was the case for a lot of the voters. But I tell you what, all NBA is going to be all over the place. Yeah. I mean, some people may have Damian Lillard first team. Some people may have him completely off. Some people may have Luka first team. Some people may have him third team. I mean, I can't wait to see it.
It's going to be fascinating. And we'll do all of that deep diving into the numbers for you on our next episode of Locked On Grizzlies. For my wonderful partner, Damichael Cole, I am Joe Mullinax. Until next time, stay locked in. This is Locked On Grizzlies.